nobody will say, no, I don't believe that a star is actually a nuclear fusion reactor. I think a star is a heap of coal that is burning. Nobody will say that, right? The problem is, there are also books doing the same kind of thing in disinformation. There's no point in having any discussions anymore about the fundamentals of climate science, for example, the greenhouse effect.
How do I decide what is scientific, what is proven, what shall I believe and what not?
That is a really, really tough question. Now,
first of all, thank you for coming by. No? That's
pleasure.
Not the obvious thing that's not the INCUSI member suddenly makes a report for INCUSI. I would ask you, first of all, Gerhard, to tell a couple of words, like really a couple. Where do you come from? What did you learn, and what do you do now? So everybody knows you.
Okay, so I'm German. I was born in Munich, and I studied physics in Munich initially. And then during my studies, I came to Grenoble, basically for 1 year to also do some climbing and alpinism, mountaineering. And then I stayed because I had the opportunity to do some geophysics there, and I liked it. Then I started doing polar research in Grenoble, did my PhD on climate modeling, and I stayed. So I've been doing polar climate modeling or global climate modeling for 30 years now.
Wow.
My job is.
That's so cool. And you originally started your studies related to climate, or was that theoretical physics?
That was really general physics in Munich at the Technical University. And then I diverged towards geophysics and then climate science.
Okay, really interesting. Let us go closer to the report which you've made. That was, I think, we'll post a link on the recording if it will be published. I do hope so. You brought us to the latest report of the UN about the what can we do with that to kind of stop the climate, not to stop, but to make it slower, the climate change. And for me personally, it was really eye-opening. Just the fact that this report exists. For some reason, that's not the familiar thing. I mean, for me at least. How do you think normal people, like simple, ordinary people, can find out that this thing exists? And if they have to, are they someone who has to know that this report exists? What do you think about that?
So these IPCC climate reports, IPCC means Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and as I said, it's done within the UN framework. They are really done originally to inform policymakers about what the possibilities are for climate action and what the state of the science is. They are not actually, initially at least, written for the general public. That's not the purpose. But they are written for policymakers who are not specialists.
Yes.
So the reports should also be readable for the general public. And that's why they tend to be relatively well known. But as you said, not everybody is aware of those, even though there's lots of outreach being done. And me being here is part of that, actually. Right. So me being here invited by INCUSI, and thank you very much for that. And talking about climate science, what the status is and what the opportunities are for scaling up climate action to prevent dangerous climate change, that is the kind of outreach I'm supposed to do as a scientist who works within IPCC. But it's also part of my normal work as a scientist who works for CNRS. So CNRS is the big French national fundamental research organization. They pay my salary. Actually, it's not IPCC who pays me.
Okay.
What I do is I'm a climate scientist. I do my research basically on polar climate, but also on global climate. And I devote some of my time to IPCC. Okay. So the IPCC is an institution under the United Nations, as you said, that recruits kind of scientists from all over the world who write that report on the status of the science. What do we know? What do we not know yet?
Mm-hmm.
They don't pay me. I'm paid by CNRS, by my French employer, who graciously lends me to IPCC to do that. So I'm doing that outreach both as a CNRS science and as a part of the IPCC.
Okay, interesting. So that in that case, this UN platform is a kind of a platform for you to spread the knowledge which you gathered and processed anyway. We can think about that this way, right?
Yeah, not really.
Okay.
I would do outreach also if I was not a member of the IPCC. Okay. Any climate scientist at least at CNRS, in many institutions, is supposed to do outreach.
Okay.
And you don't have to be necessarily a member of the IPCC to do the outreach. And of course, it gives you some more visibility. But that's not the purpose.
I got it. Yeah, I got it. What do you mean? But you publish articles, obviously, and that counts as an outreach. What I mean, though, the UN platform, you mentioned, it is for addressing the opinion leaders or decision makers in policies, for instance.
Correct.
Yes. I wonder if you personally or other fellow scientists have a kind of platform to address like ordinary people, except in POSI. We invited you, and I think it's more or less, well, it's not a systematic thing we do. I do hope we'll fix that. But I wonder if you see other platforms to address people who live their daily life and cannot really, they can actually influence that, because you mentioned there are two kind of categories to influence the climate change, the social one and the personal one. And I wonder, what is, from your point of view, what means do you have to bring these personal decisions to people so they are aware of that? How can you address people so they know that they can meet these decisions and do something with climate change?
Well, there's something you call social media.
Yes,
right? Like Twitter, LinkedIn, or whatever.
Okay.
There are lots of climate scientists, or lots of scientists in any domain, basically, who do a lot of, who are very active on these social media. Now, Twitter is something very particular.
Okay.
Lots of climate scientists have been very active on Twitter. I'm not really active on it. I have an account, sometimes post something, but I'm not really active. Many are. Twitter is a sad example of what can happen to a social media. There's a lot of disinformation currently going on, being actively pushed currently. So that's something that is really problematic. But yeah, the platforms you're talking about are basically the social media, I think.
Yeah.
That's the most important ones.
I think though, you mentioned people, like scientists, and that's the most important thing to prevent misinformation. If you follow a person, not a social media account, it's much better. Could you mention some of your fellow colleagues who you think are like popularizing the science you're dealing with? So you're not the one, as far as I understand, but just drop a couple of names.
Drop a couple of names.
Yeah, why not?
On Twitter. What names come into my mind?
Twitter.
Stefan Rahmstorf, a very well-known German scientist, very active on Twitter, for example.
Yeah.
Mann, who has been doing these long-term time series on what has been known as the hockey stick.
Yeah.
One of paleoclimate scientists. Valerie Masson-Delmotte, who is very active on Twitter and who is one of the leaders of the IPCC, doing a lot of outreach. So many people. It's really hard for me to mention names, but these are a few of them.
I can imagine. But that's good. That's good that we have these couple of ones, because like we at least mention them to those ones who are not aware. As myself, for instance, I'm not aware for some reason, no? But I'm interested in the topic. And another one question I wanted to ask you right after the presentation you made, you state that there is no discussion now about if there is a climate change or not. Although I have noticed that the knowledge is not spread like evenly. It's
Right.
always there are always gaps. And if you say, okay, in the scientific society there is no discussion, I'm sure I know these people who think, oh, kinda, probably, we don't know. And I wonder if there is now I'm talking not about people, but probably a report or a short video or something, an article which summarizes current state of knowledge and removes this misunderstanding that there is no climate change based on scientific proven facts, but understandable to people who are not scientists, for instance.
Right. Okay, so let me start with what you said about there is no discussion.
Yeah.
So the fundamental of climate science, the fundamentals of climate science are really firmly established physical principles. So as I said before in my keynote speech yesterday, greenhouse effect, for example, has been known for almost 200 years, well established already 100 years ago. It has been the object of the Physics Nobel Prize in 2021 for work that has been done in the 1960s. So there's no point in having any discussions anymore about the fundamentals of climate science, for example, the greenhouse effect, the effect of that CO2 warms the climate. That is well established. Of course, within the scientific community, there are lots of discussions about details. Question whether the hurricane frequency will increase in the future. That is open science, right? Discussing how to best do decadal forecasts of climate. That is really active science, and there are lots of discussions about these specific questions. But the fundamentals have been there for ages. Now, of course, climate science is what people, philosophers of science, sometimes call post-normal science. Okay. Let's say, what is a normal science? Astronomy would be a normal science. If I'm an astronomer and find something, I can publish it in a scientific publication, and people find it nice, and nobody is set up by it. It doesn't bother anyone, right? So you can publish something and you won't get any pushback from vested interests. Nobody will say, no, I don't believe that a star is actually a nuclear fusion reactor. I think a star is a heap of coal that is burning. Nobody will say that, right? But that is the equivalent of what is happening in climate science. And it's because of vested interests. Of course, if we say as climatologists, listen, people, burning coal, burning fuel, burning oil, and burning gas causes a major problem to human society that touches upon the money of many people, unfortunately. So, of course, there's these vested interests to try to disinform people about what is really going on. So they create that impression that there is discussion within the scientific community, that there's uncertainty about the fundamentals of the question. There are a lot of books written by good scientists about, trying to explain in simple words what climate is about, how climate works. So I don't know in English. I know a few in French and German, by renowned scientists writing things, or even by good journalists writing books. It's hard for me to come up with names. The problem is, there are also books doing the same kind of thing in disinformation.
Okay.
So it's very, very hard for the general public to, understand which is a good book, which is a bad book, because the interests are vested very often. They are hidden. In that sense, the real authoritative source are still the IPCC reports, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Let me go a bit deeper to these books you mentioned. These are like science fiction, no, not science fiction, that they are not scientific manuscripts. That's not the books you mean.
No. I'm talking about books written for the general public, explaining the problem or explaining the science in simple words.
Okay, got it.
Popularized science.
I think we'll do it this way. I'll write you an email and we'll gather at least 3, 4, 5 names of the books which you think or will recommend. We'll
Happy to do so.
Put them in the description. That's nice. Books, good mean, especially I noticed in Germany, for some reason, really reading nation, I noticed that. Really cool thing. Do you know, again, I'm thinking about like platforms like TED or TED. You've probably heard of that, yes?
Yeah.
Is there a colleague of yours who made a report on climate change on a TED platform, which will...
I think so, yeah. I've seen, I don't remember who that was, but there have been talks about climate on TED.
Yeah.
Definitely. TEDx.
Yeah.
But as you know, there's also competitors to TED who like do the disinformation, right? It's not real TED platforms. They call themselves TED something, and they do exactly the opposite of what they should do.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Look, I for some reason started doing PhD, and I kind of know how to differentiate between scientific and non-scientific. There are proper criterion, whatever, but I can easily imagine myself like 10 years ago when I didn't learn all of that, when I see 2 books, they all are books, they all are made of paper, and I'm like, okay, why should I believe this one, not that one? How would you as a scientist tell a person who wants to think itself, not just to take your recommendation, probably wrapping up the proper criterion, I don't know, like some hidden way. How do I decide what is scientific, what is proven, what shall I believe and what not?
That is a really, really tough question.
Yep.
Now, if you are, there's one principle, and that is, do not believe an expert who talks about something he's not expert on.
Okay.
Right?
Makes sense.
If you ask me about system engineering, I can tell you any nonsense you want because I don't know anything about it. I'm not a systems engineer. So it would be a very bad idea to ask me something specific about system engineering. So, same point, why would you ask about climate? Why would you ask a chemical engineer about climate? There's no point in that, right? But many of these disinformation sources actually are written by people who are not doing research actively in climate science.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the problems. So that, but also already to identify whether a person is a specialist in a domain or not, that's already difficult. So that's the problem. So my advice would be really make sure that what you read is told to you by a person who has really done good science. The problem for the general public is to identify who has been doing good, who has been doing good science. So it's kind of a really, really, really tricky problem.
Yes, I think that's a perfect advice. Though what I notice, you sometimes have to make a step back and even not to forget to identify the source of the message. Who says that? Because sometimes I hear, or I was there myself, as I said, we're not perfect, anyone. I used to do that as well. I said, somebody told me. Right. And I don't know who is the subject who did that actually. And I don't even use this instrument you told me about, this tool, to try to identify the validity of the source of the information. So the first thing would be probably to think about the source, not to rely on somebody told me. Who is this somebody?
And the problem is that these sources of disinformation, because there's a lot of money involved in the problem, they are really well funded, right? has been exactly the same problem with the tobacco industry, right? There has been a lot of disinformation spread in the 70s and the 60s, or already in the 50s, I think, about is tobacco a public health problem or not. And so these vested interests, tobacco industry, has funded people to create artificial studies showing that tobacco is no problem. And that created massive confusion in the public and delayed legislation for how many, 20, 30 years? It's really, really tough. And we are currently fighting against that.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Good thing. Well, I think we wrapped up the topic of the subject matter topic. I still would like to ask you a couple of questions which are not related to the topic probably, or at least not directly. I wonder, you mentioned you like hiking or climbing mountains or something. What hobbies do you have? How do you actually spend your free time, if you have some?
Well, today I have a problem with my ankle. So when I came to Grenoble, I did a lot of mountaineering, climbing and so on. Now I have a problem with my ankle. So what I'm doing now is biking, actually.
Okay.
I'm doing a lot of biking. So I've been working a lot for the IPCC climate report over the last year. Didn't do much science over the last year because I spent really, almost 100% of my time on the report. So now I will go back to science, do my real job again.
Yes.
But before doing that, my plan for the next 4 months is actually to do a long a long bike ride through Europe. So I'll start in Helsinki and go down to Portugal over 4 months between June and October. That's my plan. And then do science again.
I do really hope you will revive your Twitter or Instagram or whatever account and post at least what. Well, please do that. At least one picture without any comments. Okay, now I see that. Or once a week, whatever. I will be really doing that. Probably last thing. So you probably reflect on the following. We have just discussed about how to recognize what is true, what false, what is scientific, what is not. I wonder if you reflect a bit about what you do in your free time, in your spare time, what you have when you're not doing science, during mountain hiking or bicycle rides. Does this free time, how do you feel during this free time? What happens in your brain? And if that helps you to see clearer what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is false, what is scientific, what is not, to actually do your job. Is there a relation between these things? How do you think?
So the last year where I've been coordinating this part of the synthesis report, I've been way more than 100% involved, mentally involved in IPCC. There was actually no single moment basically where I thought of anything else. I didn't really, shut down my work and really just think of something else. That's also one of the reasons why I have this plan to, go away, have my leave for 4 months, just to start thinking of something else, take a step back from the whole thing. But being constantly mentally engaged in this climate thing and in this climate report thing was really a necessity because of the urgency of the situation we are in as a humanity. As we said, humanity has lost 30 years, 40 years actually to act. Emissions are still growing. If we had acted 30 years ago, started initiating the transition to low carbon, we wouldn't be in that situation today where everything has to happen at the same time if we really want to limit out the risks of climate change. We know that in the early 2030s, we will be at 1.5 degrees. Now, 1.5 degrees, we're currently already at 1.1 degree global warming. 1.5 degree global warming is a political goal. It is not the end of the world. It will just show that as a humanity, we have not managed to limit the global warming to what would be reasonable. If that's the problem.
Yeah.
It's not going to be the end of the world. We, as developed societies, we will survive. Nobody, well, few people will die of climate change in our societies. The problem is in societies that are less developed, where people have contributed less to climate change, and who suffer the most. That's a real ethical problem we have.
Got it. I have to stress it out to the end, because the question was not actually about that, but I feel that you're really interested in the topic, and that's really close to you, so you do care about that. That's not only digits and numbers and graphics for you. And that is why the question about if your hobbies help you to do your job better, you actually convert it to take care of yourself. Please don't waste your 30, 40 years again. That's what you're doing as a last message, and we'll keep it like that. Thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.